She was at the whiteboard when I walked in, and something about the way she turned around when she heard the door, marker in hand, dark blonde hair loosely pinned, hazel eyes finding mine across the room, stopped me completely. Not because she was beautiful. She was, but that was not it. Because she looked at me for 3 full seconds, and in those 3 seconds I understood, without a word, without any reason to understand it yet, that the next several months were going to cost me something. She was my professor. I was her graduate student, and we both stood there in a Boston University seminar room on a Tuesday in October, with the rain coming through the open window and something already moving between us that neither of us had been warned about and neither of us was going to be able to stop. She turned back to the whiteboard. I took the last empty seat. And for 3 months after that, I sat in that room twice a week and thought about things I had no business thinking about. A woman who graded my papers and pushed back on my arguments in front of 12 other people and made me sharper and more focused and more completely aware of her than I had been of anyone in my life. I told myself it was intellectual admiration. I was lying to myself. And so was she.
The first time I noticed what was actually happening was the third Tuesday. I had spent the first 2 weeks telling myself that the particular attention I paid to everything Sophia did in that seminar room was about the quality of her teaching, which was genuinely exceptional, and nothing else. She moved through ideas the way some people move through crowded rooms, finding the openings, never forcing anything, always arriving exactly where she intended. I watched her work and told myself I was learning, which I was. That was the true part. The other part, the part I was not admitting, was that I watched the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, and the way her voice changed slightly when she hit a passage she loved, and the way she looked at me specifically when she asked the question she already knew I would answer, and thought about these things driving home on Tuesday and Thursday evenings in a way that had nothing to do with modern literature. On the third Tuesday, she stopped beside my desk at the back of the room during a discussion exercise. She leaned over slightly to look at what I had written in the margins of the text, close, her hair near my shoulder, the warmth of her in the cool October classroom, and said something about the argument I had made that was sharp and precise and entirely about the work. She straightened up and moved on. I sat with her warmth still beside me and understood that intellectual admiration was no longer a sufficient explanation for what was happening in my chest.
I started going to office hours every week. The rational explanation was that the coursework was demanding, and she was an exceptional teacher, and the conversations continued in directions they could not go in a room with 12 other people. All of that was true. None of it was why I climbed to the third floor of the English building every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. and sat in the chair across the desk from Sophia and stayed until 4. I stayed because of the way the afternoon light came through the single tall window and fell across her face when she was reading something I had written. I stayed because of the way she argued with me, directly, without softening it, treating my ideas as things worth disagreeing with seriously, and how that felt completely different from anything I had experienced before. I stayed because the office was warm and book-lined and entirely her, and sitting in it felt like being let into something private. One Thursday in November, the light was going gold through the window, and she was mid-sentence about a passage I had written on, and I looked up from the text and found her looking at me. Not at the page, at me. She held it for a second longer than office hours required. Then she closed the book and stood and went to the window and looked out at the campus below, and I sat in the chair and looked at her standing at the window with the gold light on her and felt something move through me that I was completely done pretending was not there. She turned back eventually, composed, professional. The hour ended at 4, and I left. And she stood at the window for a long time after I heard my footsteps disappear down the hallway. I know because I stopped on the landing and listened.
I found her in the graduate library at 9 on a Wednesday evening in November. Second floor, quiet corner, dark green sweater and dark jeans. her hair loose and casual in a way I'd not seen it during office hours. A book open in front of her and a coffee going cold beside it. More herself than the seminar room allowed. More herself than anything I had seen. She looked up when I came around the corner of the aisle with my own books, and something in her expression, surprise and then something that was not entirely surprise, told me everything I needed to know about whether this was unwelcome. I sat at the same table. We worked in parallel for 2 hours, the library emptying around us, the conversation moving in and out of the texts and then away from them entirely, and then somewhere I could not have predicted. Real things, true things, the kind of conversation that only happens late at night in quiet spaces when two people have run out of professional distance to hide behind. At some point, I became aware that the space between us on the table had closed without either of us directing it, my arm beside hers, her shoulder occasionally touching mine when she leaned to show me something on the page. She went still at some point, stopped talking. I looked at her profile in the library light. She was looking at the table in front of her, aware of my arm beside hers, not moving away. I did not move away either. We sat like that for a long time, with the library breathing around us and everything that could not be said in a seminar room or an office finally having enough space to exist.
November rain in Boston arrived without asking, and I walked out of the English building at 7:30 into a street that had become a river. She came out behind me 30 seconds later, and we stood under the overhang together, watching it, and she said she'd left her umbrella upstairs. And I said I would walk her to her car, and she said she was 4 blocks to the parking structure, and I said I know. She looked at me when I said I know. I had been paying attention to where her car was since October. She knew that. I knew she knew. We walked, not running, walking, which was the wrong decision practically, and the only decision either of us was going to make. And by the time we reached the parking structure, we were both soaked and standing close in the concrete stairwell with the rain loud on the roof and the rest of the world gone behind the curtain of it. She looked up at me, her hair loose from the rain, dark at the ends, her hazel eyes doing something I felt everywhere. My hand came up and I pushed the wet hair back from her face, slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to step back. And she did not step back. She went completely still and looked at me with those eyes, and her lips parted slightly, and I felt her exhale against my hand, and the rain was loud around us, and I wanted to kiss her so badly that it was a physical thing. I did not kiss her. Not yet. Not here. Not when she was still my professor and I was still her student, and she had 11 years of professional life that I was not going to compromise in a parking structure stairwell. I took my hand back. She took a breath. She got in her car, and I stood in the rain and watched her drive away, and walked home soaking wet and thought about her exhale against my hand for 3 days after.
She gave my paper back on a Thursday in late November. A-. Comments in the margins that were precise and honest and pushed me further in the directions I had been reaching. Everything professional. Everything correct. At the bottom of the last page, in her handwriting, a single line that was not about the paper at all. The argument in section 3 is the best thing you have written. I think you already know why. I read it 3 times in the hallway outside her office. Then I went back in. She was at her desk. She looked up when I came through the door, and something in her expression said she had been expecting me to come back. I put the paper on her desk and pointed to the last line. She looked at it, then at me, and I asked her, without words, just the look, just the 3 seconds of standing there in her office, with the afternoon light and the books on every wall and the desk between us, what she meant. She stood up, came around the desk, stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the exact moment she made the decision. She put her hand against my chest, palm flat, feeling my heartbeat, which was doing nothing that could be described as calm, and looked up at me with those hazel eyes, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she stepped back, picked up the paper from the desk, handed it back to me. The semester still had 3 weeks. The boundary still held,
But we both knew, standing in that office, with her hand still warm on my chest in the place where she had placed it, that 3 weeks was not very long. The semester ended on a Friday, and she was no longer my professor, and I was no longer her student. And I texted her at 2 in the afternoon from 2 blocks away from the coffee shop on Newbury Street, where I knew she went on Friday afternoons because she had mentioned it once in October, and I had not forgotten. She was at the corner table when I walked in, dark blonde hair loose around her shoulders, a cream knit sweater, both hands around a mug, looking at me when I came through the door like she had been watching for me. I sat down across from her, and the semester was gone, and the desk was gone, and the 12 other students, and the office hours, and every professional reason to keep the distance were gone, and it was just us, in a coffee shop in December, with the snow starting outside, and nothing between us but a small table and 3 months of wanting something we had not let ourselves have. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the texts, not about the seminar, about everything we had not been allowed to talk about. Where we had come from and what we had wanted and who we were underneath the professor and the student and what the past 3 months had actually been. Under the table, his knee pressed against mine at some point, and I pressed back, and neither of us acknowledged it, and neither of us moved. When the coffee shop began to empty, he reached across the small table and covered my hand with his. I looked down at his hand over mine, that I turned my hand over and held on. And outside, the December snow came down on Newbury Street, and inside the coffee shop, something that had been building since October finally stopped pretending it was anything other than what it was. We walked out into the December evening together, and the snow was coming down the way it does in Boston in December, soft and deliberate, the city going quiet under it. And he put his arm around my shoulders on the sidewalk, and I leaned into it completely and did not think about anything except how right it felt and how long I had been not letting it feel right. We walked with no destination because the destination was not the point. He told me things on that walk that nobody in the department knew. I told him things I had not told anyone in Boston. The snow came down and the streets were quiet, and I felt something I had been keeping very carefully at a professional distance simply release. Quietly and completely, and without any of the drama I had been afraid it would bring. At the corner of Newbury and Dartmouth, he stopped walking. I stopped beside him. He turned toward me and put his hand against my cold cheek and looked at me the way he had been looking at me since October, like I was something he had been trying to see clearly for a long time and was finally allowing himself to look at directly. I closed my eyes. He kissed me in the December snow. Soft at first, then not soft. His hand in my hair and my hand at his coat and the snow around us and the street quiet and 3 months of careful discipline releasing into something so warm and real and honest that I understood standing there on the corner of Newbury and Dartmouth that I had not been wrong about any of it. Not the seminar room, not the office hours, not the parking structure or the library or the paper with the note at the bottom. All of it had been exactly what it was. And it was worth every careful, disciplined day of it. We walked 4 blocks through the snow to my apartment, and I unlocked the door, and he came in, and I did not pretend to offer tea or suggest a reason for him being there because we were both done with pretending. The apartment was warm and book-lined and completely mine, organized in the particular way of someone whose mind moves faster than their filing system. And he stood in the middle of it and looked around, and I watched him look and felt something shift in my chest at the ease of him in my space. Like he belonged there. Like the books had been waiting for someone who would actually read them. He turned around, and I crossed the room and stood in front of him and put both my hands on his face, the gesture I had been not doing since October,
the one I had practiced not doing across desks and through office hours and in a parking structure in the November rain, and looked at him clearly for the first time without any distance between us. He covered my hands with his, and what happened in my apartment that December night was not something I had planned, and not something I regretted, and not something that felt like a mistake even for a single second. It felt like the opposite of a mistake. It felt like the thing that had been true since October finally being allowed to be true completely. We gave into it, without apology. And the snow fell on Newbury Street outside, and the city went quiet, and inside the apartment was warm and real and us, and I understood, lying there in the December night, that nothing about this was wrong. Some things look forbidden from the outside because the people on the outside cannot see what is actually there. What was actually there was real. What was actually there had always been real.
I woke up before he did. Gray December morning light through the curtains. The particular quiet of a city after snow. His breathing slow and even beside me, and the apartment warm, and the whole night still present in the air of the room. I lay on my side and looked at the gray morning and felt something I had not felt in a long time settling to my chest, like it had always been supposed to be there. Not complicated, not regret, not the morning after version of a bad decision, just right. He woke slowly, turned his head, found me already awake, and we looked at each other in the gray morning light, and I put my hand against his face. Because I could now. Because there was no desk between us, no office hours, no 12 other students, no professional distance to maintain. And he closed his eyes and leaned into my hand. And I understood, looking at him, that the whiteboard and the rain and the library and the snow and everything since October had been leading here, to this gray morning, to this quiet, to the simple, extraordinary fact of him beside me in the December late.
January brought the new semester, and with it the reality of living inside something real in a world that required it to be handled carefully. I disclosed the relationship to the department in February, not because I was afraid, but because doing things correctly had always mattered to me, and this was no exception. The previous semester's grades had been finalized before anything changed. The boundary had held when it needed to hold, and I had documentation of everything, and I presented it clearly and without apology. It was complicated for approximately 3 weeks. People had opinions. The department had a process. There were conversations I did not enjoy having and would not have avoided even knowing that. Because here is what I understood in those 3 weeks of complicated. Some things are worth the complicated. Some things are worth the 3 weeks of careful conversations and professional discomfort and other people's assumptions. What James and I had was worth all of it. Not because it was easy or uncomplicated or without cost, but because it was the most genuinely real thing I had been part of in 11 years of building a professional life so carefully that there had not been much room left for anything else. I walked through those 3 weeks with my head clear and my decision made, and the specific peace of someone who was not going to apologize for something true.
Spring came to Boston, and with it the particular relief of something complicated becoming simply life. Sunday afternoons in my apartment. His books mixed into mine on the shelves until I could not easily say which were his and which were mine. Long walks along the Charles River in the April warmth with the city opening up around us. The specific ease of two people who have found their frequency and do not need to perform being comfortable, because they actually are. He finished his degree at the end of the spring semester with a thesis I had not supervised. I had recused myself properly because doing things right still mattered and always would.
And I sat in the audience at commencement in May and watched him cross the stage and felt something so warm and clear and entirely mine that I did not try to contain it. I had spent 11 years building something careful and excellent and real in that department. And I had spent one semester, in October through December, building something that made all of it feel like the setup for this. Both things were true. I was proud of both things.
April. The graduate seminar room. Same whiteboard, same tall windows. I stood at the board before the new seminar began. Marker in hand, the room empty, spring light through the glass instead of October rain, and looked at the empty seats and thought about all of it. A door opening, a student late. 3 seconds at the whiteboard that had begun everything. I had a new seminar in 4 minutes, 12 new students, everything looking exactly the same, and nothing the same at all. That evening I came home to him in my kitchen making dinner with a book open on the counter beside him that he was reading between steps. The April light through the windows, the apartment warm and his and mine and ours in the particular way of a space that has been lived in by 2 people long enough to carry both of them. I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at him and thought about October, about rain and whiteboards and the particular electricity of something beginning, and understood, standing in the April light with dinner on the stove and his book open on my counter, that the beginning had been worth everything it cost, every single day.